Alright, today I'd like to talk about a few ideas I had about how to add some variety to Honkai Star Rail, and I use the word variety specifically there because while I don't know if there's much room to expand on the depth of the game with new mechanics, I do think that there's plenty of room to expand the game laterally and give players reasons to play the game differently. See, variety is basically doing what we already can do, just in a different way, and personally I think that's more than good enough to make the game feel different. We can take a look at summons. They're basically just extra units on the field, which while very cool, is pretty much just another way to deal more damage. There's not a whole lot to it, at least for now, and to be clear, that's fine. I think stuff like that is actually good because if it gives you reasons to play different characters and basically spice up the gameplay, then as a result that only serves to improve the experience of the player. Like, I don't know about you guys, but at least for me it's not super fun just playing the same characters over and over again. Personally, I like to change up who I'm playing to get that little bit of variety because while the overall goal is to just, kill the enemy, the characters are different enough that even within damage niches, all the characters can play differently. For example, Firefly is a super break DPS and Himiko can act as one, but how they perform in battle isn't similar at all. This kind of idea is where I think the game still has tons of room to improve going forward. As long as the variety is coming in the form of characters and what they can do, then the game can definitely remain spicy enough to be interesting. So let's talk about a few of the ideas that I had to add this kind of variety to the game. For one, I think giving characters damage niches would be a really good starting point. This one requires a little bit of context to explain, so let me frame it out for you. I play a different gacha game called FGO, and in that game there's tons of characters and enemies like you'd find in most other combat games. There's 430 characters in the JP version of the game, over 500 different enemies, not to mention that any playable character can also show up as an enemy, effectively almost doubling the potential enemy count. All of those characters and enemies totaling over 1,000 individual units all have markers attached to them called traits. Those traits classify the different units, and there's a whole bunch of them. Like they can be tagged as humans, beasts, fairies, pumpkins if they're extra spooky, and other stuff like that. The list of traits goes on, but that's not all of it. There's even more ways to differentiate the units through two additional systems called attributes and alignments. Both of those extra systems are quite a bit simpler. There's only 5 different attributes, and the alignments follow traditional stuff that you might see in something like Dungeons and Dragons, like lawful, evil, chaotic, and the like. In FGO, all 3 of those different systems are meaningful in that they add different ways for your playable characters to interact with other party members and also against the enemies you're fighting. As an example, characters with the man attribute deal slightly more damage to characters that have the sky attribute, while characters with the earth attribute resist the man attribute. Alongside that, alignments can be used to apply buffs to certain party members. For example, there's a character called Moriarty that has a skill to increase party attack, but then he further increases the attack of any evil unit. And lastly, traits get bonuses as well. For example, there's a character called Romulus that can buff any Roman units, and a character called Morgan gets a massive damage boost against any enemy that has the fairy trait. Hopefully that explains FGO systems well enough, and I'm sure you'll see where I'm going with this for Honkai Star Rail. In my opinion, a system like this being added to HSR would be amazing. It doesn't have to be as complicated with tons of different overlapping systems all playing a part into how much damage you do, but even a simpler version or just taking one of those systems would be a nice way to give you variety in who you choose to bring to fights. Like, think about it, if you had a playable character that dealt more damage to human enemies like Kafka, Gepard, or the Silvermane guards from Belobog, then that would give you a reason to actually play that character against those enemies rather than just slamming your usual DPS against them. The same would apply to any other enemy, like if robots had a mechanical tag or if the Antimatter Legion had their own tag. It doesn't have to be some super crazy system, just one that offers a reason for you to actually use someone that you might not otherwise. There's plenty of ways to theme something like this in game too. Like Serval has her own workshop and is known for being a tinkerer, so it would make sense lore-wise if she had a damage bonus against mechanical monsters, or if they added something like clockwork monsters in the future, she could have a damage bonus against them. The same kind of logic could also apply to a unit like Clara. She's very familiar with different Belobog machines from the mine, so it would make sense for her to interact with them in some kind of way. Systems like this are usually just a means to an end for giving players a reason to change up who they're using, but it could also be used as a means of pseudo-buffing different characters. If this kind of system was literally added tomorrow and Serval had that damage bonus against mechanical enemies, then she could potentially be a potent DPS to use in the first half of MOC 12 as there's a whole bunch of mechanical enemies in there. Yeah, of course her base kit hasn't changed, and she would definitely still struggle outside of that niche, but it gives her a defined purpose in the game, which is definitely a better place than where she's at now. So not only would a system like this give players more variety in terms of being able to choose older, less powerful units as the right one for the job, but it also gives those same units actual power again. Like, I'm sure we all have older favorites that just don't do as much, and this is a way to get them to do more again, even if only in specific scenarios. Moving on, another idea I had actually comes from a game I've been playing recently called Marvel Rivals. In that game, there's a bunch of different factions from the Marvel universe such as the Avengers or the X-Men, and whenever 2 or more units from those factions are paired up together, you get what's called a team-up bonus. As an example, if you pair the Hulk with Iron Man, then Iron Man's rocket attacks explode with a much larger AoE and deal a bit more damage. Hoyo actually has something sort of similar to this in their other game Zenless Zone Zero, where characters get additional abilities if you team them up with specific unit types or other characters from whatever their faction is. I don't actually think ZZZ's implementation is a perfect one because the abilities that you get in that game are honestly a little bit too important to the character's kit, but I think Hoyo could definitely find a middle ground if they added that to HSR. In my opinion, HSR is already structured in a way where this kind of faction system would fit pretty seamlessly into the story and lore of the game. We've got the Astral Express, the IPC, the Stellaron Hunters, the different families from Penacony, and plenty more with tons of room for more in the future. All of these different groups could get bonuses that could come in a variety of different ways. The simplest way would just be by adding a damage bonus to units that group up, like giving a 20% damage bonus to one of the groups, but I could also see a world where new effects would be added too. For example, the current IPC units that we have all do follow-ups as part of their kits, so imagine if pairing Topaz with Aventurine or Jade triggered an additional follow-up attack for those units. It's still technically just adding more damage, but I feel seeing your characters do more stuff would be a lot more fun than just a raw damage boost. Also, if the buffs were designed in a way to allow you to run a faction member instead of a busted support like Ron May or Robin, then it would go a long way to allowing more team comp variety. If they wanted it to still be simple but with a little bit extra, then they could even go for something like the element resonances from Genshin. In Genshin, if you pair up multiple units of the same element, you get some small bonuses, like an attack bonus for having 2 fire units or an HP boost for having 2 hydro units. In HSR, something like this could be used to give small buffs to pre-existing mechanics, which would potentially give relevance to mono-element teams like Mono Quantum again. Lastly, one other thing that I had in mind was some sort of seasonal or patch-based boost to characters. Genshin actually has this in their game right now with the Seasons of the Imaginarium Theater. The units that you're forced to start your run with not only get a stat bonus in the theater, but they also get that bonus outside of it for the duration of that season. This could be another pretty fun way for pseudo buffs to be introduced to the game, and also give players more of a reason to change up who they're playing. Like, there's not going to be a lot of people that want to play Sela or Arlen anymore, but if they were to get some bonuses or even an extra boost similar to what I talked about in the grouping part of the video, then there would be a reason to use them again. This would be kinda greedy, but Hoyo could even use these patch-based seasons as a way to market reruns by rotating the buffs around different locations that we've been to. For example, Season 1 could be a Belobog patch where units like Sela and Gepard are now as strong as newer units like Phaedrao or Aventurine. Obviously, yeah, those bonuses would go away, but in a few patches it could rotate back and then you'd have a reason to play those different characters all over again. Really, all I've ever wanted is a meaningful reason to play my favorite characters. I said at the beginning of this video that I personally think just adding variety is fine because at the very least we're doing something different even if the end result is the same. I have a lot of older characters that I'd really love to play, but unless I ignore clearing the endgame modes and just focus on whatever story or events are available, then I don't feel like there's a whole lot of places where I can. This is why variety will always be nice. There's some in the game right now, like I mentioned with Firefly and Himiko earlier, but the more the better, and going forward that's something I'd really like to see from the game. It doesn't have to be actual buffs that change characters, or even targeted buffs to bring up older ones to the current standard, but I believe there's plenty of options Hoyo has regardless if they wanted to add specific reasons to play different characters. Personally, I'm a huge fan of characters getting damage niches because those would make you think a little bit more than something as simple as a group up bonus would, but realistically, I'm open to anything. Again, I'd really just like to have more of a reason to use different characters, and that will only come with these kinds of systems being added. Like, they're not really new mechanics or something that you'd always have to consider before every fight, but they're definitely things that I feel would give players a nudge towards actually having more unique experiences in those fights. And personally, I can only look at that as a good thing. What do you think? Are these ideas decent, or do you have some other ideas of your own as to how Hoyo could add more variety into the game? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, that's my rant. As always, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe, join my Discord link down below if you want a place to hang out and chat, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.